Sometimes the person everyone underestimates turns out to be exactly who you need when everything falls apart. Sometimes the girl they laugh at for wearing combat boots to school is the same one who will risk everything to save lives. Sometimes what looks like a teenager playing dress-up is actually someone who has trained harder, sacrificed more, and dedicated themselves to serving others in ways most people never will. This is the true story of how one moment changed everything, not just for the girl in camouflage, but for an entire community that learned what real courage looks like. It's about the day mockery turned to respect, when assumptions crumbled, and when a high school football field became the stage for one of the most extraordinary displays of heroism anyone had ever witnessed. What you're about to read will challenge everything you think you know about judging others, about what it means to serve, and about the incredible strength that can hide behind the most unexpected faces. This isn't just a story about a rescue. It's about discovering that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to. Sarah Martinez had gotten used to the stairs. Every morning when she walked through the halls of Riverside High School, she could feel eyes following her olive green cargo pants, her black combat boots, and the way she carried herself with the straight-back posture her father had drilled into her since childhood. The whispers followed too, soft voices wondering why she dressed like she was going to war instead of the chemistry class. "There goes G.I. Jane again," Marcus Thompson would mutter to his friends as they clustered around their lockers. Marcus was the type of guy who thought everything was a joke, especially if it involved someone who didn't fit into his narrow view of how teenage girls should look and act. His friends would snicker, making exaggerated saluting gestures when Sarah passed by. But Sarah had learned to tune out the noise. She had bigger things on her mind than the opinions of classmates who had never been further from home than the mall in the next town over. While they spent their weekends at parties and movie theaters, Sarah spent hers at the National Guard Armory, training with equipment that most adults never got to see, let alone use. The truth was that Sarah Martinez wasn't playing dress-up. At 17, she was already a certified emergency medical technician and a member of the Colorado National Guard's 168th Medical Battalion. She had joined through the Guard's early enlistment program with her parents' consent, driven by a desire to serve that had been burning in her chest since she was old enough to understand what it meant to help others. Her father, Sergeant Major Roberto Martinez, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before retiring and taking a job as a high school counselor in their small Colorado town. He had never pushed military service on Sarah, but he had taught her the values that came with it: discipline, honor, and the understanding that sometimes you have to put others before yourself, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. Sarah's mother, Dr. Elena Martinez, was a trauma surgeon at the regional hospital. Between her father's military background and her mother's medical career, Sarah had grown up surrounded by stories of people who dedicated their lives to saving others. It wasn't surprising that she had chosen a path that combined both worlds. What was surprising was how little her classmates understood about the commitment she had made. They saw the camouflage clothing as some kind of fashion statement or rebellion. They didn't see the hours of training, the weekend drills, or the way she studied military medical procedures with the same intensity that other kids put into video games. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, while her classmates were doing homework or hanging out, Sarah was at the armory learning how to set up field hospitals, how to triage casualties under pressure, and how to operate equipment that could mean the difference between life and death in an emergency. She learned to start IVs while wearing full gear, to immobilize spinal injuries in less than ideal conditions, and to make split-second decisions that could save lives. The training wasn't easy. Her instructors pushed her harder than anyone else, partly because of her age and partly because they knew that when the real emergencies came, people wouldn't care that she was still in high school. They would need her to perform like the trained professional she was working to become. Sarah's weekends were often spent on training exercises that simulated real emergencies. She had crawled through mud while carrying a 70-pound medical pack, had set up triage stations in freezing rain, and had learned to work efficiently even when exhausted, hungry, and pushed beyond what she thought were her limits. The physical demands were only part of it. The emotional weight of the training was something most people her age never had to carry. She had seen training videos of real combat injuries, had learned to compartmentalize her emotions while working on simulated casualties, and had developed the mental toughness necessary to function in crisis situations. But none of that mattered to Marcus Thompson and his friends. All they saw was a girl who wore military clothing to school, and in their minds, that made her fair game for ridicule. They didn't know about the commendations she had already earned for her performance in training exercises. They didn't know that her instructors had started talking about recommending her for advanced medical training that usually wasn't available to someone so young. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. These same classmates who made fun of her dedication to service would probably be the first to call for help if something really went wrong. They lived in a world where emergencies were something that happened to other people, where heroes were characters in movies rather than the quiet professionals who trained constantly to be ready when disaster struck. Sarah's best friend, Jennifer Chun, was one of the few people at school who understood what Sarah was really doing. Jennifer's older brother had served in the Army, so she recognized the significance of Sarah's commitment. She had tried to explain it to others, but most people didn't want to listen. It was easier to make jokes than to grapple with the fact that someone their age had already made choices that most adults would find intimidating. You know, they're just intimidated, right? Jennifer had told Sarah one day after a particularly nasty round of comments from Marcus and his crowd. They can't even commit to showing up for basketball practice on time, and here you are training to save lives. Sarah appreciated Jennifer's support, but she didn't need validation from her classmates. She knew why she was doing what she was doing, and that was enough. Her goal wasn't to impress anyone or to prove a point. Her goal was to be ready when someone needed her help, whether that someone was a fellow service member in a combat zone or a civilian in her own community. The training had taught her patience as well as medical skills. She had learned to work with people who underestimated her, to prove herself through actions rather than words, and to maintain her professionalism even when others didn't. These were lessons that serve her well in the hallways of Riverside High School, where she faced a different kind of challenge every day. What Sarah didn't know was that all of her training, all of the sacrifice and dedication that her classmates dismissed as playing soldier, was about to be put to the ultimate test. In just a few days, everything would change. The skills she had worked so hard to develop would be needed in ways she had never imagined, and the classmates who had spent years making fun of her commitment to service would see exactly what that commitment meant. The morning of the homecoming game dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect Colorado weather that made everyone want to be outside. Sarah went through her usual routine, putting on her cargo pants and combat boots, tying her hair back in a regulation bun she had grown accustomed to wearing, and checking her backpack to make sure she had everything she needed for the day. She had no way of knowing that by evening, those same clothes that her classmates mocked would mark her as the person everyone was looking for. She had no way of knowing that the training she had endured while others enjoyed their carefree teenage years was about to save lives in her own community. She had no way of knowing that this would be the day when everything changed, when respect would replace ridicule, and when her quiet dedication to service would speak louder than any words ever could. As Sarah walked into school that morning, Marcus Thompson was already holding court by the lockers, entertaining his friends with another round of jokes about little soldier girl and her costume. He had no idea that before the day was over, he would owe that same girl his life. None of them did. But Sarah was ready, whether she knew it or not. Years of training had prepared her for this moment, even if she couldn't have imagined how it would unfold. The homecoming game was the biggest event of the year at Riverside High School. The entire community came out to support their Eagles as they faced their crosstown rivals, the Westfield Warriors. The stands were packed with families, alumni, and students who had been looking forward to this night for weeks. The smell of popcorn and hot dogs filled the air, and the sound of the marching band warming up created an atmosphere of excitement and anticipation. Sarah Martinez sat in her usual spot in the student section, but she wasn't really watching the pregame festivities. Her mind was on other things, specifically the training exercise she had scheduled for the following weekend and the advanced medical certification she was working toward. Even in the middle of the biggest social event of the year, she found it hard to shut off the part of her brain that was always thinking about ways to improve her skills and knowledge. Jennifer Chin nudged her with an elbow. "Earth to Sarah, you're missing the best part of homecoming. Making fun of the ridiculous dance moves the seniors are doing." Sarah looked up to see a group of senior boys attempting what could generously be called dancing, but looked more like a series of uncontrolled spasms. Despite herself, she smiled. "Sorry, I was thinking about the mass casualty drill we're running next weekend. You know what your problem is?" Jennifer said, shaking her head with mock seriousness. "You think too much about serious stuff. Sometimes you just need to watch people make fools of themselves and laugh." Before Sarah could respond, the lights went down and the homecoming court was introduced. Marcus Thompson was escorted onto the field as part of the court, looking pleased with himself as he waved to the crowd. Sarah noticed several of her classmates cheering extra loud for him, the same ones who had spent the day making comments about her military costume. The game itself was more exciting than anyone had expected. Both teams were evenly matched, and by halftime, the score was tied 14-14. The crowd was energized, and the atmosphere in the stadium was electric. Even Sarah found herself getting caught up in the excitement, cheering along with everyone else when the Eagles scored a touchdown early in the third quarter. It was during the fourth quarter, with the Eagles leading 21-17 and only 8 minutes left on the clock, that everything changed. The accident happened so quickly that most people didn't immediately understand what they had seen. The Warriors were driving toward the Eagles' goal line when their quarterback threw a pass toward the corner of the end zone. The Eagles' safety, Tommy Rodriguez, jumped high to intercept the ball, but he collided midair with the Warriors' receiver. Both players came down hard, but it was Tommy who didn't get back up. At first, the crowd thought it was just another hard hit in what had been a physical game. Football players got knocked down all the time, and they usually popped right back up, ready for the next play. But Tommy wasn't moving. He was lying on his side in an unnatural position, completely still. The referees immediately stopped the game and signaled for the team medical staff to come onto the field. Both coaches rushed over, along with the school nurse who always attended the games. But within seconds, it became clear that this was beyond what the usual game day medical support could handle. Tommy was unconscious and appeared to be having difficulty breathing. Worse, the way he had landed suggested a possible spinal injury. The school nurse, Mrs. Patterson, had basic first aid training, but she recognized immediately that this situation required more advanced medical intervention than she could provide. "We need to call an ambulance," she told Coach Williams, trying to keep her voice calm even though her hands were shaking. "This looks serious. We shouldn't try to move him." The problem was that the nearest hospital was 45 minutes away by ambulance, and the nearest trauma center was even further. In a rural community like theirs, advanced medical care wasn't something you could take for granted. For critical injuries, every minute counted, and they didn't have minutes to spare. Coach Williams had his phone out, calling 911, when he noticed someone pushing through the crowd of players and coaches who had gathered around Tommy. It was Sarah Martinez, still wearing her cargo pants and combat boots, moving with a purposeful confidence that seemed completely at odds with her age. "I'm a certified EMT with the National Guard," Sarah said, kneeling down next to Tommy, without waiting for permission. "Let me assess him." Mrs. Patterson looked skeptical. She knew Sarah was involved in some kind of military program, but she had assumed it was more like ROTC than actual medical training. "Sarah, honey, I think we should wait for the paramedics." "Ma'am, with respect, if he has a spinal injury and his airway is compromised, waiting could kill him," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. She was already checking Tommy's pulse and respiration, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "I need someone to call the National Guard Aviation Unit at Peterson Air Force Base. Tell them we need immediate medical evacuation." The crowd in the stands had gone completely silent. 20,000 people were watching as this 17-year-old girl, whom most of them knew only as the weird kid who dressed like a soldier, took charge of a life-or-death situation. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She could see that Tommy's breathing was shallow and irregular, which suggested possible internal injuries in addition to the suspected spinal trauma. His pupils were unequal, indicating a probable head injury. Everything about his condition screamed that he needed advanced medical care immediately, not in 45 minutes. "His airway is partially obstructed," Sarah said, positioning herself to maintain Tommy's neck alignment while clearing his breathing passage. "And we've got signs of increased intracranial pressure. We need to get him to a trauma center now." Coach Williams was still on the phone with 911, but the dispatcher was telling him the same thing Mrs. Patterson had already figured out. The ambulance would take at least 45 minutes to arrive, and then another hour to get Tommy to a hospital equipped to handle his injuries. That's when Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her own cell phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "This is Private Martinez, 168th Medical Battalion," she said when the phone was answered. "I need to speak to the duty officer immediately. We have a civilian medical emergency requiring immediate evacuation." Within seconds, Sarah was connected to Major Andrews, the officer in charge of the guard unit's medical operations. She quickly explained the situation, the nature of Tommy's injuries, their location, and the fact that ground transportation would take too long. "Private Martinez," Major Andrews said, and Sarah could hear him thinking through the situation. "You're sure about the assessment? Spinal trauma with possible brain injury." "Yes, sir. Unequal pupils, irregular breathing, and he hasn't regained consciousness. He needs a trauma center, and he needs it now." There was a brief pause, and then Major Andrews made a decision that would later be called both brilliant and completely against protocol. "We've got a Black Hawk training flight about 20 minutes out from your location. I'm going to have them divert for medical evacuation." The crowd was still silent, watching as this teenager who they had dismissed as playing soldier coordinated what was essentially a military rescue operation. Sarah continued monitoring Tommy's vital signs while she gave Major Andrews the exact coordinates of the football field and briefed him on the logistics of landing a military helicopter in the middle of a high school stadium. "The field is regulation size, so you've got plenty of room," Sarah said. "The crowd is already clear of the field, and I can have the area secured before you arrive. Patient will be ready for immediate transport." As Sarah worked to stabilize Tommy while waiting for the helicopter, she noticed that the joking and whispering from her classmates had completely stopped. Marcus Thompson, who had spent years making fun of her military gear, was standing just a few feet away, watching with an expression of complete shock as Sarah took charge of a situation that had overwhelmed all the adults around her. Mrs. Patterson, who had initially been skeptical of letting a student take over the medical response, was now following Sarah's instructions without question. She had realized that Sarah wasn't just some kid playing dress-up. She was a trained medical professional who knew exactly what she was doing. "I need you to help me maintain his neck alignment while I check for internal bleeding," Sarah told Mrs. Patterson. "And someone needs to clear the field completely. When that helicopter gets here, we're going to need room to work." 20 minutes later, the sound that would be talked about in their small town for decades began as a distant rumble and grew into the unmistakable whop 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 of military helicopter rotors. Every person in the stadium looked up to see a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter approaching the field, its navigation lights cutting through the darkness. As the helicopter settled onto the 50-yard line, Sarah was ready. She had Tommy stabilized and had coordinated with the arriving flight medic to transfer him directly to the aircraft's medical bay. The entire operation, from the initial injury to wheels up, took less than 30 minutes, a response time that would have been impossible with conventional ambulance service. But the most important part of the story was just beginning. As the Black Hawk lifted off into the night, carrying Tommy toward the trauma center where his life would be saved, 20,000 people sat in stunned silence. They had just witnessed something extraordinary, not just a rescue, but the revelation that the girl they had been making fun of for years was exactly the person they needed when everything went wrong. The silence that followed the departure of the Black Hawk was unlike anything anyone at Riverside High School had ever experienced. 20,000 people sat in complete stillness, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The only sound was the distant rumble of the helicopter's engines fading into the night as it carried Tommy Rodriguez toward the trauma center that would save his life. Sarah Martinez remained on the field for several minutes after the helicopter left, making sure she had collected all of her medical supplies and ensuring that the area was safe for the game to resume if the coaches decided to continue. Her hands were steady as she packed her equipment, but inside, she was dealing with the adrenaline crash that always followed emergency medical situations. This had been her first real-world application of everything she had learned in training, and while she was confident that she had done everything correctly, The weight of having someone's life in her hands was something no amount of practice could fully prepare you for. Tommy's condition had been critical, and if she had made a mistake in her assessment or treatment, the consequences could have been fatal. Coach Williams approached her as she was finishing her cleanup. He was a man who had been coaching high school football for 25 years, had seen hundreds of injuries, and thought he had experienced every possible scenario that could occur during a game. But he had never seen anything like what had just happened. "Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I need to thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here tonight." Sarah looked up at him, her expression serious but calm. "Coach, I just did what I was trained to do. Anyone with the same training would have done the same thing." But Coach Williams shook his head. "No, that's not true. I've been around long enough to know that having the training and being able to use it under pressure are two completely different things. What you did tonight, coordinating the helicopter, taking charge of the medical response, staying calm while everyone else was panicking, that's not something you learn from a textbook." Around them, the crowd was beginning to stir. People were talking in hushed voices, sharing their disbelief at what they had witnessed. Many of them were looking toward the field where Sarah was standing, seeing her with completely different eyes than they had just an hour earlier. Mrs. Patterson, the school nurse, had tears in her eyes as she approached Sarah. "Honey, I owe you an apology. When you first said you were an EMT, I thought you meant you had taken some kind of basic first aid class. I had no idea you had real medical training." "It's okay, Mrs. Patterson," Sarah said. "Most people don't understand what a National Guard medical program involves. It's not really something that comes up in normal conversation." But it wasn't okay, and Sarah knew it. For years, she had endured the comments, the jokes, and the dismissive attitudes of people who saw her commitment to service as some kind of game or phase she was going through. Tonight had proven that her training was real, her skills were genuine, and her dedication had literally saved a life. In the stands, Marcus Thompson was having his own moment of reckoning. He was sitting with his friends, the same group that had spent years making fun of Sarah's military appearance, and none of them were talking. They were all thinking about the same thing, how completely wrong they had been about her. "Dude," one of his friends finally said, "did that really just happen? Did Sarah Martinez just call a military helicopter?" Marcus couldn't answer. He was remembering every joke he had made, every comment about her playing soldier, every time he had rolled his eyes when she walked by in her combat boots. He was thinking about how he had always assumed that her military involvement was just some kind of attention-seeking behavior, a way to seem different or special. The reality was hitting him hard. While he and his friends had been focused on parties, video games, and impressing girls, Sarah had been training to save lives. While they had been complaining about homework and weekend jobs, she had been learning skills that most adults would never master. While they had been living in a bubble where the most serious decision they faced was which college to attend, she had been preparing to make life-or-death decisions under pressure. Jennifer Chun found Sarah as she was finally leaving the field. As Sarah's best friend, Jennifer had always known about her training, but even she was amazed by what had just happened. "How are you doing?" Jennifer asked, falling into step beside Sarah as they walked toward the parking lot. "I'm okay," Sarah said. "It's just a lot to process. In training, you know it's not real, so there's less pressure. Tonight, if I had made a mistake, Tommy could have died." "But you didn't make a mistake," Jennifer pointed out. "You saved his life. That helicopter never would have been called if you hadn't been here. The ambulance would have taken too long." Sarah nodded, but she was already thinking about what she could have done better, how she might improve her response time, and what additional training might help her be more effective in similar situations. It was the same mindset that had driven her to excel in her guard training, always looking for ways to improve, never satisfied with just being good enough. As they walked through the parking lot, people were approaching Sarah to thank her or to ask questions about what had happened. Many of them were people who had never spoken to her before, parents and community members who had heard about the military girl at the high school but had never really understood what that meant. "Are you really in the National Guard?" one father asked. "I mean, at your age?" Sarah explained about the early enlistment program and her medical training. She talked about the weekend drills, the advanced courses, and the commitment she had made to serve. People listened with a level of attention and respect that she had never experienced before. But the most significant conversation happened when she reached her car. Marcus Thompson was waiting for her, standing alone and looking uncomfortable. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Marcus was struggling to find words for something he had never had to say before. "Sarah," he finally said, "I owe you an apology. A big one." Sarah looked at him, waiting to hear what he had to say. "I've been making fun of you for years," Marcus continued. "I thought you were just trying to be different, trying to get attention. I never understood that you were actually training to do what you did tonight." "It's okay, Marcus," Sarah said, though they both knew it wasn't really okay. Years of mockery and dismissive comments couldn't be erased with a simple apology. "No, it's not okay," Marcus said. "I was wrong about you. Completely wrong. And if I had been the one hurt tonight instead of Tommy, you have saved my life anyway, even after all the crap I've given you." Sarah considered this for a moment. "You're right, I would have. That's what the training is for, to help people when they need it, regardless of who they are or how they've treated me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what she had said. "How do you do that? How do you help people who haven't been good to you?" "Because it's not about me," Sarah said simply. "When someone is hurt, when someone needs help, that's all that matters. Everything else is just noise." It was a level of maturity and selflessness that Marcus was only beginning to understand. He had spent his entire high school career focused on his own social status, his own entertainment, his own immediate gratification. Sarah had been focused on preparing to serve others, even those who didn't appreciate or understand her commitment. As Sarah drove home that night, she thought about Tommy Rodriguez and hoped that the surgery would go well. She thought about her parents, who would be proud, but not surprised when she told them what had happened. She thought about her guard unit, who had supported her call for medical evacuation without question. But mostly, she thought about the look on Marcus Thompson's face when he apologized to her. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. It was sadness that it had taken a near tragedy for people to understand what she had been trying to tell them through her actions for years. The news of what had happened at the homecoming game spread quickly through their small town. By morning, everyone knew the story of how the weird military girl from the high school had saved Tommy Rodriguez's life and coordinated a helicopter rescue in the middle of a football game. But for Sarah, the real impact of that night was just beginning. The respect she had earned would change her remaining time in high school, but more importantly, it would change how her community understood the meaning of service and sacrifice. People would finally see that the uniform wasn't a costume, the training wasn't a game, and the commitment wasn't a phase. Tommy Rodriguez would make a full recovery, thanks to the rapid medical intervention and evacuation that Sarah had coordinated. But the story was about more than just one life saved. It was about the power of dedication, the importance of being prepared, and the way that true service speaks louder than any words ever could. The Monday morning after the homecoming game was unlike any other Monday in Sarah Martinez's high school experience. She walked through the same hallways she had navigated for 3 years, past the same lockers where students had gathered to whisper about her unusual clothing choices. But everything was different now. Instead of snickers and sideways glances, Sarah encountered something she had never experienced at school before: respect. Students who had never spoken to her before nodded as she passed. Teachers who had known her as a quiet, serious student looked at her with new appreciation. The girl who had been dismissed as weird or attention-seeking was now seen as the person who had saved Tommy Rodriguez's life. The local newspaper had run a front-page story about the helicopter rescue, complete with a photo of Sarah kneeling beside Tommy on the football field. The headline read, "Local teen coordinates military rescue at high school football game," and the article detailed Sarah's training with the National Guard and her quick thinking during the emergency. But the media attention wasn't what mattered to Sarah. What mattered was the phone call she had received from the hospital that morning, informing her that Tommy was awake, alert, and expected to make a complete recovery. The doctors confirmed that the rapid evacuation had been crucial to preventing permanent damage from his injuries. Sarah's first class of the day was AP Biology with Mrs. Henderson, a teacher who had always appreciated Sarah's serious approach to academics, but had never really understood her military involvement. Mrs. Henderson stopped the normal lesson plan to address what had happened at the game. "I think we all learned something important Friday night," Mrs. Henderson told the class. We learned that service and preparation aren't abstract concepts. They're practical skills that can make the difference between life and death. Sarah, would you be willing to share with the class what your training involves? For the first time in her high school career, Sarah found herself at the center of positive attention from her classmates. She talked about her medical training, the weekend drills, and the commitment she had made to serve. Students who had never shown interest in her activities before were asking thoughtful questions about the National Guard program and what it meant to be trained as an emergency medical technician. Marcus Thompson was in that biology class, and he listened to every word Sarah said. He was seeing her in a completely new light, not just because of what she had done Friday night, but because he was finally understanding who she had been all along. The confidence she displayed when talking about her training, the knowledge she demonstrated when answering technical questions, and the maturity she showed in discussing the responsibilities of service all painted a picture of someone far more accomplished than he had ever realized. During lunch, something unprecedented happened. Instead of sitting alone or with Jennifer at their usual table in the corner, Sarah found herself surrounded by classmates who wanted to hear more about the rescue. Students who had never given her the time of day before were genuinely interested in her experiences and her training. "What was it like when the helicopter landed?" asked Jessica Parker, one of the popular girls who had previously ignored Sarah's existence. "Were you scared?" asked David Kumar, a senior who had always seemed intimidated by Sarah's serious demeanor. Sarah answered their questions honestly, explaining that the adrenaline had kept her focused during the emergency, but that she had felt the weight of responsibility afterward. She talked about the importance of training, about how the repetitive drills and scenarios had prepared her to act quickly when it mattered. But the most significant change in Sarah's social dynamic came from an unexpected source. Marcus Thompson approached her table during lunch, carrying his tray and looking somewhat nervous. "Sarah, would it be okay if I sat with you?" he asked. "I'd like to hear more about your guard training, if you don't mind sharing." Sarah gestured to an empty chair. Over the past few years, she had imagined various scenarios in which Marcus might finally treat her with respect, but she had never imagined it would happen like this. Marcus spent the lunch period asking detailed questions about Sarah's training and experiences. He wanted to understand how someone their age could handle the responsibility she had demonstrated and what kind of commitment was required to develop those skills. "I keep thinking about Friday night," Marcus said. "When Tommy got hurt, all the adults were panicking, but you knew exactly what to do. How did you stay so calm?" "Training," Sarah said simply. "When you practice emergency scenarios over and over, your brain learns to function even when your emotions are running high. The military calls it training to standard. You practice until the correct response becomes automatic." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I feel like I need to apologize again," he said. "Not just for making fun of you, but for not trying to understand what you were really doing. I assumed you were just playing dress-up, but you were actually preparing to save lives." "I appreciate that, Marcus," Sarah said. "But I wasn't doing it for recognition or to prove anything to anyone. I was doing it because I believe in being prepared to help when help is needed." "That's what I don't understand," Marcus said. "How did you know you wanted to do this? How did you decide to make that kind of commitment when we were just kids?" Sarah thought about how to explain the calling she had felt from a young age, the way she had been drawn to service, even when she didn't fully understand what it would require of her. "I think I always knew I wanted to do something that mattered," she said. "My parents never pushed me toward the military, but they taught me that we have a responsibility to contribute something positive to the world. For me, that meant learning how to help people in their worst moments." The conversation continued throughout the lunch period, with Marcus asking questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand Sarah's perspective. Other students listened in, many of them hearing for the first time about the depth of commitment required for military service, even in a part-time capacity. After school, Sarah had her regular Tuesday training session at the National Guard Armory. When she arrived, she found that word of Friday night's rescue had spread throughout the unit. Major Andrews, the officer who had authorized the helicopter evacuation, was waiting to debrief with her. "Private Martinez," Major Andrews said, "I want you to know that your actions Friday night were exemplary. You assessed the situation correctly, followed proper protocols, and coordinated an effective rescue under pressure. That's the kind of performance we expect from our most experienced medics, let alone someone who just turned 17. Sarah stood at attention as Major Andrews continued. I'm recommending you for accelerated training in advanced trauma life support. It's unusual to offer this program to someone your age, but your demonstrated competence under real-world conditions shows you're ready for additional responsibility. The advanced training would mean more weekend commitments, more studying, and more time away from typical teenage activities. But for Sarah, it represented an opportunity to become even more effective at what she was passionate about doing. Thank you, sir, Sarah said. I'd be honored to participate in the advanced program. That evening, Sarah's parents sat down with her to discuss what had happened and what it meant for her future. Roberto Martinez had been proud of his daughter's service commitment from the beginning, but seeing her perform under real pressure had confirmed his belief that she had chosen the right path. Mija, he said, using the Spanish endearment he had called her since childhood, what you did Friday night was remarkable, but I want to make sure you understand the weight of what you're taking on. Advanced trauma training means you'll be called upon in increasingly serious situations. Dr. Elena Martinez nodded in agreement. As a trauma surgeon, I know how difficult it can be to carry that responsibility. Are you prepared for the emotional demands of this work? Sarah had been thinking about this question since Friday night. Holding someone's life in her hands had been both terrifying and deeply meaningful. She knew that future emergencies would bring similar pressure, and that not every situation would have the positive outcome that Tommy's rescue had achieved. I am, Mom, Sarah said. I know it won't always be easy, and I know that sometimes people won't survive despite our best efforts. But I also know that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Friday night confirmed that for me. The next day brought another unexpected development. Principal Davis called Sarah to his office, but not because she was in trouble. He wanted to discuss the way Friday night's events had changed the dynamics at the school and what it might mean going forward. Sarah, Principal Davis said, what happened at the game has given our entire community a new perspective on service and commitment. I've had parents calling to ask about programs that might help their children develop the kind of skills and character you've demonstrated. Principal Davis proposed that Sarah consider starting a club or program that could introduce other students to concepts of emergency preparedness and community service. It would be a way to share what she had learned and possibly inspire others to consider their own paths of service. The idea intrigued Sarah, but she wanted to make sure any such program would be authentic and meaningful, not just a feel-good activity that would fade once the excitement about the rescue died down. I'd be interested in discussing it further, Sarah told Principal Davis. But it would have to be a serious program, not just something to make people feel good about themselves. As Sarah left the principal's office, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few days. The rescue at the football game had been a culmination of years of training and preparation, but it had also been the beginning of something new, a recognition that her commitment to service could inspire others and create opportunities she had never imagined. 6 months after the homecoming game that changed everything, Sarah Martinez stood before a packed auditorium at Riverside High School, preparing to address the first graduation ceremony for the Emergency Response Leadership Program she had helped create. The program had grown from Principal Davis's initial suggestion into something far more comprehensive and impactful than anyone had imagined. 23 students sat in the front rows wearing matching red polo shirts emblazoned with the program logo, a medical cross surrounded by the words "Prepare to Serve." These weren't just students who had taken a basic first aid class. They were young people who had committed to 6 months of intensive training in emergency medical response, crisis leadership, and community service. The program had been designed with input from Sarah's National Guard unit, the local fire department, and the regional hospital. Students learned CPR, basic trauma care, and emergency communications. But more importantly, they learned the mental discipline, physical conditioning, and emotional resilience necessary to function effectively in crisis situations. Marcus Thompson was among the graduates. His transformation from the boy who had mocked Sarah's military clothing to a dedicated student of emergency response had been one of the most remarkable aspects of the program's first year. He had thrown himself into the training with the same intensity he had once applied to making jokes, and he had emerged as one of the program's most capable students. When I started this program, Marcus said during his graduation speech, I thought I was learning how to help other people. What I discovered is that I was learning how to become the kind of person worth helping. Someone who takes responsibility seriously, someone who prepares for challenges instead of just reacting to them, someone who understands that real strength comes from service, not from tearing others down. Sarah watched from the side of the stage as Marcus spoke, remembering the boy who had spent years dismissing her commitment as playing dress-up. His speech was about more than emergency response training. It was about the personal growth that came from dedicating yourself to something larger than your own immediate interests. The transformation hadn't been limited to Marcus. Jessica Parker, the popular girl who had previously been focused primarily on social media and shopping, had discovered a talent for crisis communication and was planning to study emergency management in college. David Kumar had overcome his natural shyness to become an effective team leader during training scenarios. Each student had found something in the program that had changed their perspective on what it meant to contribute to their community. The keynote speaker for the graduation ceremony was Major Andrews from Sarah's National Guard unit. He had agreed to address the students because he had been impressed by the quality of training they had received and the seriousness with which they had approached their responsibilities. What you've learned over the past 6 months, Major Andrews told the graduates, goes beyond emergency response techniques. You've learned that being prepared isn't just about having the right equipment or knowing the right procedures. It's about developing the character to act when action is needed, to lead when leadership is required, and to serve when service is called for. Major Andrews went on to explain how the students' training connected to larger concepts of citizenship and community responsibility. He talked about the way emergency preparedness created stronger communities and how the skills they had learned would serve them throughout their lives, regardless of what careers they chose to pursue. But the most meaningful moment of the ceremony came when Tommy Rodriguez took the stage. Tommy had made a complete recovery from his injuries and had finished his senior year as planned. He was heading to college on a football scholarship, something that wouldn't have been possible without Sarah's quick thinking and the helicopter evacuation that had saved his life. I owe my future to Sarah Martinez, Tommy said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. But what I've learned since that night is that Sarah's ability to save my life wasn't an accident. It was the result of years of preparation, training, and commitment to serving others. The students graduating from this program today have made the same kind of commitment. They've chosen to be ready when someone needs help. Tommy's words highlighted what had become the central theme of the Emergency Response Leadership Program. The heroes aren't born, they're trained. The students who were graduating had learned that ordinary people could develop extraordinary capabilities through dedication and preparation. After the formal ceremony, families and community members gathered for a reception in the school cafeteria. Sarah found herself surrounded by parents who wanted to thank her not just for saving Tommy's life, but for creating a program that had changed their children's perspectives on responsibility and service. My daughter has always been a good kid, one mother told Sarah, but this program has given her a sense of purpose I've never seen before. She talks about wanting to become a paramedic now, and she has the confidence to believe she can do it. These conversations were deeply meaningful to Sarah, but they also reinforced the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. The students in the program looked up to her as a role model, and she understood that her actions and decisions would influence how they approached their own commitments to service. As the reception was winding down, Sarah stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. Jennifer Chun found her there, sitting on the steps of the school where they had spent 4 years together. "Penny for your thoughts," Jennifer said, settling down beside her best friend. "I was just thinking about how much has changed," Sarah said. "A year ago, most of these people thought I was weird for caring about military training. Now, they're asking me to help their kids learn the same skills. Are you okay with that?" Jennifer asked. "It's a lot of pressure to be everyone's go-to person for emergency response." Sarah considered the question carefully. The success of the program had brought opportunities she had never expected, including offers to speak at other schools and inquiries about expanding the program to other communities. But it had also brought pressure to be perfect, to always have the right answer, and to live up to the hero image that people had created around her. I think I'm okay with it, Sarah said finally. But I have to remember that I'm still learning too. The night I helped Tommy, I did what I was trained to do, but there's always more to learn, always ways to improve. The danger would be if I started believing that I have all the answers. Jennifer smiled at her friend's characteristic humility. That's probably why you're the right person for this. You care more about actually helping people than about being seen as a hero. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus Thompson, who had been looking for Sarah to speak with her privately. He had something he wanted to say without an audience of other students and parents. Sarah, Marcus said, I wanted to thank you again, not just for what you did for Tommy, but for giving me a chance to be part of this program even after how I treated you. Marcus, you earned your place in the program through your own hard work, Sarah replied. The way you treated me before doesn't matter as much as the way you've chosen to grow since then. It matters to me, Marcus said. I've been thinking a lot about why I used to make fun of you, and I think it was because what you were doing made me feel bad about myself. You were committed to something important while I was just drifting through high school without any real purpose. Sarah appreciated Marcus's honesty, but she had a different perspective on his journey. I don't think you were drifting, Marcus. I think you just hadn't found the right thing to commit to yet. Some people know what they want to do from an early age, and others need time to discover their path. There's nothing wrong with either approach. As their conversation continued, Sarah realized that one of the most important outcomes of the past year hadn't been the recognition she had received or even the lives that had been saved through better emergency preparedness. It had been the way the experience had brought people together around a shared commitment to serving their community. The Emergency Response Leadership Program had created connections between students who might never have spoken to each other otherwise. It had given young people a sense of purpose and direction that many of them had been missing. And it had shown the entire community that teenagers were capable of far more responsibility and contribution than most adults typically expected from them. As Sarah prepared for her own graduation in just a few weeks, she was already thinking about the future of the program and how it might continue to evolve. She had been accepted to West Point, where she would continue her military education and her medical training. But she was also committed to ensuring that the program she had helped create would continue to thrive and grow. The girl who had once walked the halls of Riverside High School alone, dismissed by classmates who couldn't see past her camouflage clothing to understand her dedication to service, was now leaving behind a legacy that would impact her community for years to come. The respect she had earned through her actions had created opportunities not just for herself, but for every student who would follow in her footsteps. On graduation day, as Sarah Martinez walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the entire auditorium rose in a standing ovation. But Sarah knew that the real measure of her success wouldn't be found in the applause or the recognition. It would be found in the lives that would be saved by the students she had trained, in the communities that would be stronger because of the preparation she had helped instill, and in the understanding that true service is its own reward. The girl in camouflage had taught her community that heroes don't seek attention. They seek to be ready when attention doesn't matter, when only action counts, and when someone's life hangs in the balance. In the end, that was the most important lesson of all.